So because Ingenuity was such a success, they now have more confidence that they can not only fly helicopters on Mars to show that it's possible, but also to have it be useful, right? Basically, take these helicopters, fly to the location where the samples are, pick them up, fly them back to the lander, and then put them into the rocket. 3 friends and I, we decided that we wanted to participate in an ocean rowing race. At the time, it was called the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge. Now it's called the World's Toughest Row. It was a race from the Canaries, from La Gomera, to the Caribbean, to Antigua. It's also unsupported, so there is kind of the framework of the race around it, right? Like you do have some support and preparation. They're going to inspect your boat, make sure it's up to security standards. You can call them on your sat phone, but it's not like there's a boat that's next to your boat all the time. So you have to also bring all your food, you bring all your spare parts.
Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Marlin, thank you so much for coming on the Ignition Sequence podcast. Great to see you and talk with you. And man, Zurich, Switzerland. I love Switzerland. I've been there a couple of times, and man, Switzerland is a fabulous country. Man, I had a great time there.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And yeah, I agree. It's pretty great here.
So Marlin, before we talk about your role at Gravis Robotics, which is based in Switzerland, which is kind of upending the construction world and paradigm with heavy equipment and making it, automatic and robotic. I'm going to talk about your journey through NASA and JPL working in the robotics program and, how did you get started and, where are we today with robotics and how is it infiltrating so many different, businesses and impacting jobs that people normally do?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. So my journey with NASA started during my PhD when I was at Oxford. So my supervisor did his PhD with someone that later ended up working at NASA. And they wanted my supervisor's expertise for a problem called pathfinding problem on one of their projects that they were working on. And so my supervisor was like, hey, I'm a professor now. I don't really have time to get my hands dirty with code anymore. But I have this new student that is very interested in the pathfinding problem, and maybe he can help. And so that, I was very lucky to get my foot in the door. And so I started working with them as an external collaborator on a project called Axel. And I don't know if you want me to get into Axel right now, or we'll save that for later. But anyway, so I start working with them on Axel, and then later I did a postdoc at NASA, then got converted to a full-time employee, and eventually realized that I wanted to live closer to family and moved back to Switzerland, and then that's how I ended up at Gravis Robotics.
So when it comes to robotics, and I'm just an average guy, I love science. I love learning new things. I love technology, innovation. I love to see where we're going, but I don't know everything. So I'm just curious about path planning. We mentioned that term, path planning. What is path planning in robotics?
So path planning in its most general form is a very abstract problem, but I think it's best introduced with an example, right? Like a robotics example. So think about an autonomous car or another kind of mobile autonomous system like a robot vacuum. A system like this really has to solve 3, maybe 4 big problems. So one of them is it has to kind of build a map of its environment to know what's around it, right? So typically systems use cameras or LiDARs or radars to just kind of sense the environment. And then once it has this map, it needs to localize itself within this map. So it needs to know where it is relative to obstacles, say, right? And like there's a little more to that, like it needs to know which state it is in and stuff. And then the third problem is, once it has a map and it knows where it is in this map, it might be given a goal where it needs to go in this map. And then it needs to figure out how to actuate its motors to get to this goal, right? And so the fourth potential problem is maybe it's not given a physical location as a goal, but it's more given a task, say like clean this room or something, right? And then there's this other component that has to figure out where to go in the map to achieve the task or accomplish the task. But the pathfinding problem is really part of that third step where you already have a map of the environment, you know, where you are within this map, and you're given a goal location. Then you need to figure out how to move through this map without bumping into things, right? And I guess without violating any of the other constraints that your system might have. Um, so you need to figure out this path, and then from that path, you can figure out how to actuate your motors to get where you want to be. So in a nutshell, I'd say that's the pathfinding problem in robotics. It's figuring out this path through a map.
So what you're talking about is, and I'll give you an example. I used to produce a television show here in America called Innovation Nation, which aired on CBS. And we did a story about a family business in Cedar City, Utah, who invented a lawnmower that was autonomous called Moro. And it did the same thing that you just mentioned. You know, you could map out any size yard you had. It could be square, it could be rectangular, it could be oval, it could be whatever. And using LiDAR, as you mentioned, you know, this autonomous lawnmower would literally overnight while you're sleeping, and it's electric too, would mow your yard. And you could do it 3 times a week, once a week, whatever it required. But it was just fascinating. So is that path planning kind of that kind of technology is inside that same lawnmower?
Absolutely, that's certainly pathfinding. Almost any autonomous system that you'll see that's moving around in the world has to solve some form of this problem, right? Otherwise, it doesn't know where to go or how to get there.
And what does it require to kind of program all that? That's where you get your engineering degree, and you know this is what you've been studying is all those components working together at the same time and writing the code for that. That's kind of what you're doing.
That is what I'm doing. Yes. It really depends on the system. So this is kind of the introductory example where in this case of this autonomous mower or maybe the vacuum cleaner robot that we talked about before, right? Like your system kinematically is pretty simple. It's just it's moving mostly in 2D space, right? Your lawn is just mostly flat, but you know, first approximation is 2D space, and so it has some position on it and then some orientation. But if you think about more complex systems, let's maybe say we're talking about drones, then you are in 3D space, so you have to think about
Mm,
3D positions and 3D orientations. But then we also do planning. We're going to probably talk about excavators where you're moving in 2D space, but you also have this big arm that you can move around. And so
right.
path planning then becomes not only how do you move through physical space, but how do you move through what we call configuration space, which is kind of you look at all the degrees of freedom that your system has. So all of the most for robotics, it's mostly your pose, which is position and orientation, and then all of the joints that your robot can actuate, or maybe
Yeah.
sometimes also not actuate, right? But so all of these configurations. And then you need to coordinate all of this together, which becomes complex with many degrees of freedom. Maybe a good example would be think of like a robot dog, right, that needs to move from one point to the other. And
Like the
so
Boston Dynamics dogs.
exactly, like
Those things scare the shit out of me. Those things look evil and badass, but from a technological standpoint, it's a wonder how
oh,
they
I
work.
agree. Yes, no, they're fascinating. They're super cool. Um, but yeah, I agree. They can be a little scary. Um, but like my point is that, for a system like this, it has four legs, right? I don't know exactly how many degrees of freedom the spot has. Um, but maybe you also want to make sure that you can, crawl under a space, right? And then you need to like consider this while you're planning. And so then problems like this are much more complicated algorithmically than um, or at least more computationally expensive than the simpler problems where you just have basically a disk in 2D space that's moving around and can orient.
Speaking about JPL and NASA, where you worked prior to where you are now, um, Did you work on the Mars helicopter thing? Did you have anything to do with that, or can you talk to us about that? Because this
Yeah, so I
helicopter in the Martian airspace is fascinating to me.
I agree. I agree. There's currently, unfortunately, it's not operational anymore, but for a long time and much longer than we originally thought, there was this helicopter on Mars called Ingenuity, right, which is part of the Perseverance program, or I guess I don't know if you could call it program, but it launched with Perseverance. And it was initially intended as a tech demo to just show that we can, have powered flight on Mars, which is incredible. It's very hard, right? Because
Oh
Martian
my god,
atmosphere.
I can't. The atmosphere difference and creating the ratios of lift, in that Martian atmosphere versus what we have here on Earth must have been a something to try and figure out.
Yeah, it's about 1% density is what I've been told. So like lifts really depends on the density of the atmosphere, obviously, right? And so it's a very very impressive engineering that JPL did there. And then I got to work on what might be the successors of this program. So currently, one of the biggest robotics programs that NASA is involved in is called the Mars Sample Return. Right. So Perseverance is up there collecting samples of Martian rock, basically, and it's analyzing these samples as best it can, but it only has so many instruments that you can bring on Mars, right? Like you're very space limited because it all has to fit onto this rover, and also weight limited because you need to bring it up there, right? And so ideally, you would like to bring these samples back to Earth because here on Earth we have lots of way more advanced instruments to analyze the samples, right? And so it's collecting these samples and then really it's putting them in its belly and then driving around and collecting more samples and putting them in its belly. And so the Mars sample return mission is ongoing, right? It's already started. The Perseverance is doing its thing. And the next steps are going to be that there's going to be a lander that's going to land on Mars. And then it's going to take the samples from Perseverance, put them in a rocket. The rocket is going to launch from Mars into Martian orbit. And then in Martian orbit, it's going to be caught by a satellite. And the satellite is going to then send samples back home. And
Wow.
so yes, it's a very, to me, it's a surprisingly complicated mission architecture. Right? Like if you think about like mission architectures in NASA, they're rightfully risk averse, right? They want to make the simplest thing. And so this, I was surprised to learn that this is how we're going to do it. But super cool. And one of the risks with this is though that if Perseverance were to not persevere, right? If it failed sometime between now and when we have the lander, then those samples are essentially trapped in its belly, and you can't get them out. And so what they did as a kind of to mitigate this risk is they took some samples twice, and they dropped those samples at a specified location on Mars. So those are just laying on the ground now. And so if Perseverance were to fail, then you could go and pick those up and bring them to the lander with a different rover, right, or a different system, and then
Right.
you have those duplicate samples that you can analyze back on Earth. And this is where the sample recovery helicopters come in. So because Ingenuity was such a success, they now have more confidence that they can not only fly helicopters on Mars to show that it's possible and to get the publicity, but also to actually have mission or have it be useful, right? Basically, take these helicopters, fly to the location where the samples are, pick them up, fly them back to the lander, and then put them into the rocket. So what I got to work on was the planning problem for those helicopters, but once they're on the ground. So you can think because of the atmosphere it has such a low density, they really have to be very light, the helicopters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the robotic gripper that's kind of attached to their belly that's going to pick up the tube that's laying on the ground is incredibly weight limited, right? It's also very impressive engineering to get this to work, to get such a light gripper. And kind of as a consequence of that, its workspace is very limited, meaning that the helicopter has to be very precisely above the tube to be able to pick it up with the gripper. So
That's
the
like that
engine.
arcade game. That's like that arcade game where you got the little thing and you're trying to go down there and grab the little plushy toy and you're playing that game
Basically, we're
in
playing that
space
game in space on Mars. Yes.
on Mars. That's it.
Yeah.
Wow. What a great job. I get to play that game all day and figure that out.
Yeah. Hopefully, with more success than I have at the arcade.
Exactly right. You'll spend $50 to win a $2 plushie toy.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so, one of the challenges is you can't really land, or the Ingenuity team wasn't confident that you can land the helicopter precisely enough above the tube for the gripper to be able to pick it up. So instead, we put wheels on the legs of the helicopter. So now you can land just in the vicinity of it, and then you drive over the tube
Right.
to be able to pick it up. So my part, right, I did a tiny thing in this whole project, right? But it was about once the helicopter is already landed, how do you then find a path to get over the tube accurately enough that you can pick it up?
Yeah, because it has to know the terrain and it has to use that lidar to kind of map the terrain and figure all that out because it's probably not flat and even. I mean, you can plan for that to the best of your ability based on what you know topographically about the Martian surface, but still you have to plan for variances, even slight variances, right?
Variances like rocks, right? Like the
Yes.
wheels are pretty small, so even small rocks you can get stuck on.
Yeah.
The helicopters have cameras on them that they're used to see the rocks, but you do need to be able to plan around them. You also don't necessarily want to drive over the tube, right? So you want to and you need to be able to recognize the tube, which is what's going to tell you where you need to go, right? So you have the map with your build with your camera where you detect rocks. You know where you need to go because that's where the tube is, and you need to figure out kind of where you are with respect to that tube. And then you have the map, and you have everything you need to solve your pathfinding problem.
You said I worked in a very small little part of this big complex project. How much time did you invest in working out that small little part that you were responsible for? How long did it take you to kind of crack that code, write that code, program it to where your project lead could go, yeah, that's going to work. This is it. Let's lock that in.
That's a good question. I worked on this project for about a year, but
Yeah.
I wasn't able to see it through. So even right is not enough. So the way it works with this with the flight code is that typically it's not the same people that write the code for um, kind of proof of concepts or demonstrations on Earth um, as the people that then write the code that will actually fly on the system. Because there it's
Mm,
much more constrained. You need to be very careful um, exactly how you lay out the memory and stuff. And so that's not my expertise. And so there are people that are purely just focused on this, and that's their thing. And yeah, so I
wow.
mean, this is incredible to have been a part of, right? But like, it's also very humbling because you realize how many people are working on this and need to work together to make something like this work. It's been a very, very cool experience.
Is it dozens of people, hundreds of people, or thousands of people?
I mean, all in all, it's thousands of people, right? If you
Right.
think about all the systems that have to work, including the launch and like that, it's like, yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
It's very hard to. It's very hard for me to guess. So I'd rather
Yeah.
not say an exact number. But yeah, it's lots and lots of very smart people.
You also touched another aspect of that project called EELS, the Exobiology Extant Life Surveyor. Is that
That's
correct?
right. That's correct. Yes. EOS was for a moon of Saturn called Enceladus. And for Enceladus, they know for sure. Enceladus is an ice moon. It's completely covered in ice. But they know for sure that there is a liquid ocean underneath, a global
Wow.
ocean.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
um,
Got it. So
and
this would be to explore underneath the ocean and through these channels deep, like this snake light robot thing that can go into little caves and curves and twists. And that's got to be kind of cool to work on a robotic snake, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's another incredible project that I got to be part of. Yes, with all like incredible challenges too, and I think a very important question that EELS wanted to answer. So, if I may kind of elaborate on this a bit, it's
Sure.
one thing that I think people or the immediate thing that pops up is there's liquid water that's not on Earth, so we want to go there and see if there's life, right? Like that's the main scientific kind of question that the project was geared towards. But another big question is, I mean, I don't want to say more fundamental because the other one is like, is there life outside of Earth? But it's a technological question about how do you explore surfaces that are far away from Earth, right? And so if we look back at how we explored the surface of the moon, we essentially just shot rockets at the moon until we were able to hit it, and then we shot rockets at it until we were able to kind of orbit it, and then eventually we landed on it, right? And then and so like that's a viable strategy for the moon because the moon is right there, right? Like in terms of space, the moon is our like it's very close, and you can just shoot rockets at it whenever you want, basically. And then with Mars, we had to kind of change our strategy a bit because Mars is a little farther away, right? Like for Mars, you have this launch window that you get every 26 months, where it can get there reasonably quickly, and
It's
with a
really only
reasonable payload.
26. I didn't even know that. It's only 20 once every 26 months you have a window of opportunity to launch and use the Earth's, gravitational spin to launch you out there into Mars only once every 26 months?
Once every 26 months is where
Wow.
it's. I mean, I'm sure it's probably possible to get there, but it would take way longer, and you could bring much less stuff, right?
Dang.
Um, so it's a little
Space
trickier.
is
You can't.
hard.
Space is
Space
very
is
hard. Yes,
hard,
yes.
man.
Yes. And so I think, like in my view, our strategy for Mars was, luckily we got better at getting into orbits of planets, but it's still very hard, right? Like not few
Right.
nations have managed to do it for Mars. But we sent a couple of orbiters. You sent one, and then you wait 2 years. You send another one. You take pictures, and you try and figure out what the atmosphere kind of looks like. Then you may try and land something, right? So you send a lander. You learn a lot more about the atmosphere because you're traveling through it, and then once you're on the ground, you learn a lot about what the ground actually looks like, right? And then you can start designing your system, your rover, right? Because then you can figure out kind of what the rock size is like where are going to be, where are interesting science targets, and what kind of system do we need to design to explore those targets, right? So this is a longer process. Yeah, it's multiple missions, um, and it took us a while to be able to have a mobile system on Mars.
Hmm.
Now, when we talk about Enceladus, that's at Saturn. So that's way farther away than
Wow.
Mars, right? And so Saturn, even just to get there, like it depends a lot on the constellation of Earth and Saturn. Um, but like typically it's between like a good travel time is between 6 and 8 years, right? Just to get there,
Jeez.
right? And so
Man.
you can't really like if you want to send like a couple of orbiters and then a lander and like it'll take you decades or well it'll take you centuries to be able to like
Right.
go there with this strategy. And so what EELS is really trying to do is like, okay, so what can we do if we what kind of system do we design if we don't know what the surface of this moon or planet looks like, right? And eels is one of the proposals is a snake robot because snakes are very versatile, right? They can move
Mhm.
in unconsolidated terrain like sand and snow. They can move on the hard ground. They can climb. They can
Mhm.
swim. Like, and so yeah, eels was an attempt or kind of a proposal to show that there's this robotic system out there that can handle lots of variation in terrain. So we don't need to go through all of these phases where we try and map out exactly what the surface looks like.
Well, that's interesting. Fantastic. So, talk about what you're doing now at Gravis Robotics there in the Zurich, Switzerland area. Talking about automating the construction industry.
Mm.
and with big cranes and excavators and all kinds of things, what kind of pieces of equipment are you automating? What can they do? And, are they actually being implemented now, or is it still kind of in a design testing phase?
Gravis is a startup. It's a spin-off of ETH Search, right? One of the local technological universities, and it definitely started as a research project where they tried autonomous excavation, and now it's being productized, right? We're trying to make it into a product.
So
Um,
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but you got started at ETH in Zurich.
ETH in Zurich, yes.
Yeah. So ETH, for those who don't know, what is ETH in Zurich? It's like your technological institute there in Switzerland, right?
It's yes, that's exactly right. It's the Technological
Okay. All right.
Institute in Switzerland, and it's often ranked as mainland Europe's best technological university. And robotics, I think, is excellent at ETH.
Is ETH like Europe's version of MIT here in the United States?
I think that's a fair comparison. Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. So go ahead. Go ahead. Finish your thought there about starting from ETH and then moving on.
Right. So it started at ETH. The first, you know, almost 10 years ago, I'd say, is where the first PhD student at ETH started working on automating these excavators.
Hmm.
And now we're moving into product phase. Unfortunately, we haven't quite left stealth mode yet in terms of what exactly the product is going to be. So it's going to have to be a little bit vague, but think just maybe we should talk about excavation, autonomous excavation, right? And
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, because I saw the videos on the website on Gravis Robotics website, and the video of the excavator is pretty sick.
I agree. It's I think in terms of robotics, it's one of the most interesting problems that is being solved currently. And I said this before I started working there too, because when I look at most robotics products, they're either in warehouses or like how do you say, um, the big robotic arms that build cars and
Oh
stuff.
yeah, well,
Uh,
like for example, here in the United States, very big use of robotic arms in the auto manufacturing sector.
exactly, manufacturing. Yes. So that's kind of the very useful part of robotics, right? We already make lots of use of this, and then like we have the more mobile systems like autonomous cars and the spot dynamic trope, like the Boston Dynamic spot, um, which certainly don't provide as much value yet, but we're getting there, right?
Hmm.
But for most of these mobile systems, they their interaction with the world is limited. So most of them, they observe. Maybe they can interact with a door, right? They can maybe open a door. They can push a button, but it's all very structured, the interaction, because the interaction is very hard. And what I really love about autonomous excavation is that it's unstructured, right? Like you're moving Earth, and Earth is messy, and it's hard to predict how exactly it's going to move. So
Hmm.
intellectually, I just think it's a very cool problem, um, and it's tractable. Like there's ways to deal with it, um, but it's just interesting. I think it really tickles my mind. Like I really like working on this problem because of this aspect of it that it moves Earth in an unstructured way, and it's also like those are some of the most powerful robots there are, right? Like these are huge systems, um,
Yeah.
and they really influence the surroundings that they operate in.
Isn't there a couple of, and I got this just strictly by viewing the video on your website. Isn't there a couple of different variations where the excavation robot can go out on its own? You can program it. It can do a side of a mountain. It can do, clearing away boulders from a rock slide or whatever. And then the other component is where you have an operator, but they're removed from the machine. So they're away from the machine. Maybe they're, I don't know, 100 feet, 100 yards away, and they're sitting in this robot. It's like a video game itself. You're sitting in a chair and you got the controllers, but you're not actually in the machine itself. You're watching it on a video screen, but it keeps the operator safe and the machine could be maybe it's at a high degree angle mountain, like it's at 40 degrees or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. I think like so it's two different ways, but I think there's lots of synergy between them. So one of the reasons I think it's plausible to do it within years and not decades is that you can have this teleoperation, right? If we think about cars or drones, if something goes wrong, it's hard to you can't always just stop, right? If you're on the highway and the robotic car doesn't know what to do, like you need to call for help, but then you can't just like push the brakes. That's dangerous, right? Or if you're a drone, like you can't just stop flying, right? Then you're gonna fall.
Right.
Um, for an excavator, for us, you're on a construction site, right? So you can have rules around how close people are able to approach the excavator when it's in autonomous mode. And then when there's a problem, you can just basically call home. So you stop digging. So say you're digging a hole, right? You stop digging. You say, hey, I don't know, like there's a pipe that is not in the plan or whatever, right? Like something that needs human supervision. And then your kind of operator that, maybe is doing home office, right? Like just logs in from home, logs into this
Mm.
machine, and then can take over and figure out the very special situation that's going on, and then put it back into autonomous mode, and then it can do its thing again, right? So I think there's lots of this. So this is what makes me very hopeful that the technology is going to be useful soon, and not just in decades, because it's going to be very hard to figure out all of the corner cases such that the machine is autonomous 100% of the time.
Yeah. I love that. I love your tagline, tap your finger, move a mountain.
Yes, I
That's
agree.
pretty cool. So let's go back to space now. What Gravis Robotics is doing, can that be, and are you planning this for future settlements and habitat building on the moon or on Mars?
Um, I can't talk about Gravis's plans, but I will say what my personal hope is for this, right? Like I
Okay.
think um, autonomous construction is almost going to be a necessity to at least some degree when we start building permanent habitats on other planets or moons. I just don't see construction is very labor intensive, right? And it's going to be
Yeah.
very hard to make it work if none of it is automated. So, is it going to be excavation? I don't know, right? Possibly, maybe not in the first stage. Probably first right? Like, because one of the tricky things is radiation in space. If you go to places where you don't have a thick atmosphere, then you need to worry about
Mm.
radiation if you want to place humans there. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
likely, I would say the first habitats are going to be in caves where you don't have to like dig the hole yourself, basically. Um,
Yeah.
but then like there's also other like very exciting work being done in autonomous construction, like 3D printing of whole buildings, right? Like that's something that people work on. Where I know there's companies that look at taking regolith lunar, like just material that's
Yeah.
on these other planets or moons, and then mixing them and creating a 3D printable material out of them.
Of course, when you're pushing the envelope and doing new technology, people always go into fear mode. Well, how's that going to impact society? So many jobs are tied to construction, labor force, skills, that type of thing. What's been discussed inside your company in regards to that,
Hmm.
the impact on society?
So one thing that's interesting is that we often hear from you know people from the industry. They're worried about labor shortage or excavation operators. So they're not so much worried about um, the machines taking jobs away. They're more worried about not having enough people and automation not coming soon enough. um,
Okay.
and then I guess the other thing is that I think it's going to take a while. Like initially, you're going to have one operator that maybe going to be orchestrating a handful of machines, and then as the machines get better, you'll be able to orchestrate more. but there's always going to have to be people involved in the process, at least in the foreseeable future for me. Um, so maybe like short term, one of the hopes, at least for me, would be that the jobs get less taxing on the operators, right? It's better to,
Yeah.
maybe they can stay at home or they can be in an office space, they can have their coffee. Um, Sometimes also these excavators are in, dangerous locations, as you said before. Maybe, if they're handling toxic material, then it's
Yeah.
really uncomfortable actually to be able to operate these because you have to have the suit on and the mask and yeah. So these applications I think are more kind of short-term positive effects that I'm hoping to see. But
So how do you get started? I'm curious, how people find their way into their careers. When you were a kid, did your parents invest and get you the robotic Lego kit and all that kind of stuff? I mean, how did you get pulled into this?
I don't think I have a clear answer to it. It's I used to play a lot with Lego. I used to like
Yeah.
build things and also like, just with rubbish basically. I used to take apart my grandpa's calculator and then I wasn't always able to put it back together. But I took it apart because I wanted to see like what's in there, how does it work. Um, but then I was very broadly interested in lots of different fields. So like when it came time to kind of choose my field for my bachelor's degree, I was interested in economics, like law, computer science, and I ended up studying mechanical engineering um, because I wanted to work for Porsche. That was my initial
Ah,
motivation to go into mechanical engineering because I really like the
hey
cars. I'm
man,
like,
that
oh,
sounds great. That's a great
it's a
plan.
those are great cars, right? Um,
Yeah.
and then, like at university, I got very interested in robotics. I saw all the cool stuff that was happening at ETH. Um, got much more interested in programming and computer science, and then kind of pivoted to robotics for my master's degree. And then once my master's was over, I just didn't want to finish studying. And so I'm like, oh, I guess the next thing is a PhD. And so I applied for a PhD and got lucky and got into at Oxford. And then, you know, through my supervisor's connection with a person that worked at JPL, I got my foot in the door there, and then that's how I got to JPL. And now, we already talked about kind of how I got to Gravis.
Oh, Marlin, you're such a humble person, which I like. You
Uh,
totally skipped over the Atlantic Ocean row craw. You totally skipped over that. Now, when we launched our podcast Ignition Sequence, our very first guest was a guy named Jacob Hendrickson. I don't know if you're familiar with that name or not, but Jacob set a global record in rowing across the Pacific from east to west, from the San Juan Islands in Washington State to Cairns, Australia, 336 days, 11 months at sea, no resupply out there, 11 months all on his own. Crazy, crazy story. You did
Super
the
impressive.
Atlantic. Huh?
Super, yeah, super impressive. I listened to the episode. It was
Oh, you
super
did? Oh,
impressive.
okay,
Yes,
great.
yeah.
Okay, great, great. So tell us about your experience in crossing the Atlantic. Did you go by yourself? Did you have a team? Where did you start and stop? And how long did it take? Tell us about it.
Yeah, I mean, love to. So this was between my master's and my PhD. Um, Three friends and we decided uh, that we wanted to participate in an ocean rowing race. At the time, it was called the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge. Now it's called the World's Toughest Row. But it's a
Yeah.
race from Canada.
Was this decision made in a bar drinking?
No, actually, it wasn't.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's surprising. But yes, we weren't drunk when we decided to do
Okay. All right.
it. So it was a race from the Canaries, from La Gomera, to the Caribbean, to Antigua,
Hmm.
and it's also unsupported. So there is kind of the framework of the race around it, right? Like you do have some support and preparation. They're going to inspect your boat, make sure it's up to security standards. You can call them on your sat phone, but it's not like there's a boat that's next to your boat all the time. So you have to also bring all your food. You bring all your spare parts. And for us, it took much less time than for Jason. Was it
Jacob.
Jacob? Sorry, for
Yeah,
Jacob.
yeah.
So we rode across in 30 days,
Wow.
which was
Wow.
much faster than we anticipated. So when we started, the world record was 35 days, and typically, like good years, the first team came in like 40 days. So we were targeting 40 days of rowing, but then because the conditions were so favorable for fast crossings, which means just strong winds and high waves, but in the right direction. Right?
Right.
We were really fast. It was a very fast year. So the world record was broken. Unfortunately, we didn't win. Well, we got third, um, which
That's not bad.
was pretty good for especially. I mean, right? Like we all grew up in Switzerland, the landlocked country.
Yeah.
3 out of the 4 guys didn't know how to row when we decided we were going to do it. None of us
Were
had
you
any
one of
ocean.
them? Were
I
you,
was
were
one
you
of
one of
them.
the
Yes.
guys? You did
Yeah, I
know how to
didn't.
row. Okay, perfect. Perfect.
No, didn't know how to row. None of us had any ocean experience with like sailing, or we weren't even on like a cruise, right? It's just like it's just never been on the ocean really.
Oh
Um, and
man,
then we
that's
just
nuts.
yeah, we made it across and in pretty decent time. So it's still the third fastest time for an Atlantic crossing.
Because it was a team situation, did you row 24/7? Was somebody rowing through the night?
Yeah, we were. So most of the teams that race have a pretty similar rhythm, especially the fours. You do pairs of rowers, right? So you always two guys are rowing, and then every 2 hours you switch basically. So you're rowing for 2 hours, then you have 2 hours of rest, then you're rowing for 2 hours, it's 2 hours of rest, and you just 24/7 until you get there, basically.
Oh my gosh. Wow. And what was it like? What's the Atlantic like? And what time of year was this? I'm assuming it was the summer.
It was in December, actually. It was in December.
Really?
Yes.
Holy crap. Oh my gosh.
Which was good. So usually, so most also I've learned that for sailing, especially from east to west is better because you have these pretty consistent winds that last from I don't know mid-December to January, that will that are favorable, right? And so most crossings are in December, and also in terms of the temperature, it's far enough south that it was still very hot. Like heat was actually a problem for us, and I can't
Okay.
imagine what it would have been like in the summer.
And the
Yeah,
humidity factor. Yeah.
humidity and it's not like because on these ocean rowing boats you don't have a lot of shade, right? There's cabins that you can get some shade, but then there's no wind. But when you're outside, there is no shade, and so you're either just exposed to the sun, or you're in this what feels like an oven. It's very moist, like you're sweating, and it's just not a yeah. Like heat was definitely a problem, um, also for dehydration and just sweating a lot. Yeah.
And what was your experience? What did you feel like emotionally, spiritually being out on the ocean under the stars? It's just man and nature at that point for a month with your teammates. What was that experience, like emotionally for you?
Mm. Emotionally, like very similar to the ocean itself. It's like lots of up and downs, right? Like lots of very high highs, but also some pretty low lows. Um, I think
Hmm.
the hardest part was after maybe the first week when you because you start out and you have lots of adrenaline, like you're like ready to take it on, you're well rested, you're well fed, and you start rowing in this pretty insane rhythm, right? Like you're doing, and initially we did 2.5 hours of rowing and 1.5 hours of rest for the first 3 days or so to try and get a head start on the fleet. Um, and your body tells you, hey, like this is not a good idea. Like stop. You need to rest. You need to fuel yourself. Like you're a little seasick, right? You can't
Hmm.
take in as many calories as you would like. So your energy levels just drop. You're kind of you develop your blisters. Your bum starts to hurt. Um, and then like I don't know, maybe day 5 or 6, you're doing it for what already feels like a very long time, right? You're already doing like, I don't know, and you realize you're nowhere to being done, and
Yeah.
this is your life now. You're just like it's 2 hours of rowing, 2 hours of rest, and the rest is really like if you're lucky, you get about 90 minutes of sleep. But you also have to in this like 2 hour period, you have to eat, right? Like on average, we try to eat 6,000 calories a day.
Yeah.
You have 6 breaks, so every break you're trying to eat about 1,000 calories. And then there's like hygiene, right? You need to make sure that none of your sores become like there's no inflammation, right? Like you need
Right.
to take care of that. There's some chores on the boat, like you need to clean the solar panels. You need to make sure um, kind of the VHF radio is working. We had deals with sponsors where we needed to send emails and pictures. It was just, like it's not that
Yeah.
when you're done rowing, you're done with all the work.
I mean,
And
I'm just taking all that in that you're saying it. It's like, there's something that's romantic and idyllic about the concept of just man and the ocean and rowing like this leisurely pace, and you're one with, the gods and planet and nature, but it sounds excruciatingly difficult and painful and a mental. Was your takeaway when you finished it? Was it more of a mental endurance exercise or more of a physical endurance exercise?
way more mental, way more
Yeah,
mental.
I was
Yeah,
going to say that. Yeah.
yeah. But like, and there was some like obviously now that I look back, I romanticize it a lot. But even during the race, there's lots of moments that you could enjoy, right? It's not that it's all bad and painful and
Right.
frustrating, but because we saw wildlife, you see incredible sunrises and sunsets, right? Then like the starry night is also something like you can easily see Milky Way with your bare
Yeah.
eyes. Um, and there's something, I'm like these are three of my best friends, and you're like doing this project together. There's lots of
Yeah.
camaraderie. Um, I was 26 at the time, kind of,
Mm,
this juvenile feeling of invincibility still in me, like to
yeah.
some extent. And you're just sometimes like you're rowing through a storm in the middle of the ocean, but it's you and your three best buddies, and like you're making it work. And yeah, it's very hard, but life is also very simple, right? There is no deadline. Like it's not complicated. You just have to do the work, and there's something very calming about that. It's not stressful in the sense that you need to like juggle many balls, right? Like as we now
Right.
do in like modern life, you have your deadlines that you want to hit, you like the people that you want to go meet, and your hobbies and like all that kind
Yeah.
of life on the ocean was super simple. Like
Did you see a kraken? Can you confirm there's a real kraken?
no, I wanted to say unfortunately not, but actually I was pretty fortunate. I'm pretty happy that we didn't see one.
What's the most amazing thing you did see that was just sticks with you all the time that you reflect on?
I mean, the first 2 days we saw dolphins. We were followed by a pod of dolphins.
Mm.
Um, so that was amazing. And then there's also these, I don't know the correct term for them, but the algae that glow in the dark.
Oh,
Um,
bioluminescence.
yes, exactly. So then when you like when the ore hits the water, you get the bioluminescence in the water, and like you're
Oh,
under the
wow,
stars,
yeah.
and yeah. So that's just an
That's
incredible
gotta be
atmosphere.
magical. That's gotta be
Mm,
magical.
that's the right word
Wow.
for it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was
Wow.
that was um very pretty. Yeah.
So how did that experience prepare you for what you're doing today, if at all? Maybe it's completely separate. I don't know.
No, I think there's lots of learning. I think so. My one of the benefits that I think I took from it, I find hard to articulate in a way that it's useful for other people. But I think it made me a lot calmer. Um, yeah, just made me a lot
I can
calmer.
I, I can see that. So y- through that perseverance and endurance and experiencing that, when the shit hits the fan, so to speak, in your everyday career, family life, kids go berserk, whatever, you can just take a pause and go, yeah, that's nothing. That's okay. I'll get through this.
Yeah, and at least like I think one of the things that made the race hard is that it's relentless, right? There's now I have a hard day at work, or like, maybe something else happens, but at the end of the day, I'm laying in a warm bed, it's dry, and I get to sleep for 8 hours if I can.
Yeah.
And that just didn't have, like, there was no time for that. First of all, the bed on the boat was always wet. It was always full of salt water. So it was never really comfortable. And then it was always hot. And I always knew I have like 90 minutes, and then I have to go back out there. And so at
Yeah.
least now I'm like, oh, I know, like, there's always this reset where I also like sleep is incredibly important for me, right? Also for like emotionally, like it's an emotional reset. Like you get back into a new day, like, oh, this is a new opportunity to make it right. Um, on the boat, there was never a reset. It was just a constant, like, it's a 30-day, and that's also why the way I remember it is a big blur. There is no clear, especially the middle days is just, they all kind of blur into each other.
Right. Wow.
So I think it made me
So,
calmer. I think there's also more kind of concrete takeaways from it, in terms of how I react to things. There's some confidence in myself physically, and also I know that even if I'm very frustrated, I'm very tired, I'm dehydrated, I'm still a decent human being. Like, I don't steal my friends' foods, and I don't show up late for my shift. Like, that kind of stuff is good to know about yourself. It's great to know about your friends too, right? Like, I know there's at least three guys. I mean, more because I count my family too, but there's lots of people that I would trust with my life. And I know I
right.
have, and they haven't failed. Um, so I think there's lots of value in that. And some of the resilience, I think, translates very directly to like fieldwork and robotics, right? When we tested eels on the glacier, that was a 3-week deployment where we were on the glacier every day. And the glacier is harsh too, right? You're exposed to the elements all day. It was summer, so it was the kind of the worst kind of weather because it was cold rain. It wasn't really snow, but
Yeah.
so cold rain and wind, and I'm sure having experienced, physical hardship before made it easier for me to be able to concentrate on the work that I was there to do. So I think in that sense, it had a pretty direct benefit for me in my career also.
Well, getting back to your career and robotics, what do you see as the future of robotics? Where can we go with it?
So this one is a tricky question. I think I feel like lots of very, very smart people have tried to predict the impact of technology on the future and have failed miserably. And I'm not as smart as them. Um, but I can tell you things that I'm excited about. I think one of the problems that robotics needs to solve for it to be very useful is dexterous manipulation. And what I mean by this is like almost human level manipulation of various objects, right? Being able to coordinate maybe even multiple hands, but definitely multiple fingers. Um, and I think once we kind of are able to do that, it'll open the door for kind of general purpose home assistance robots, right? The thing that we all do, like you have a robot at home that will clean your kitchen,
Hmm.
vacuum and like do all this kind of stuff. Um, at least from my perspective, it looks like what's preventing this from being a reality now is that we really haven't figured out how to do dexterous manipulation. And once we do this, I think lots of very exciting robotics products are going to be possible.
What do you think about? What do you dwell on? What keeps you up at night? What's kind of spinning in your head as far as, yeah, maybe I got to tackle that, or, you know, I'm worried about that, or I ponder this.
Also, a great question. I don't know. I think I'm lucky in that I have pretty good sleep, so I'm not up many nights. But I do think a lot about um, what it means for me to live a fulfilling life, right? And I feel like so far I've done pretty good. Like I was very fortunate in the experiences that I was able to make. Um, and I think when I turned 30, I started kind of looking back at at my 20s, and kind of thought about the principles I had and kind of the North Stars, if you will, work that I used to navigate different decisions in life. And then thought about or tried to extrapolate this for my 30s and think about where I would end up when I was 40 if I used the same principles and same guidance. And didn't really like the where it was going. So it's not that I would regret what I did in my 20s. Not at all. I think it was an excellent decade for me. Um,
Yeah.
but also I recognize that I recognize that I wanted to, I guess, probably change a little bit the course that I was taking. Um, and I don't have a conclusive answer yet, right? Like I'm still figuring it out, but
Yeah.
it's very
That's what
exciting.
life is. Life is a journey to figure out who you are and where you want to go.
I'm interested in philosophy to an extent, and also again like these questions of where do you want to go in life, what do you want to do, and then like
Hmm.
why is it that we want to do these things, right? Um, you can imagine like and maybe to circle back to the row a little bit, like we we had a speaker on the boat, but it broke on day 3, and so for the rest of
Mm.
the crossing, it was just me and my friend rowing 12 hours a day, and we just talked, and we really just talked about everything, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then like you try and ponder the meaning of life. You talk about what it means to be a good son, maybe like a good family member, what it means to be a good friend. Um, you want to have kids? Like what does it mean to be a good father? Um, what could we do with our kids when they're at different stages in life, right? What is important
Yeah.
for their development? I think just lots of different. Like I enjoy talking about these um, topics with anybody who will indulge
Well,
me
even just
freely.
the topic of, I'm in a career that it's building towards a future of robotics and robotic integration with humanity. But to what point to where we don't lose our humanity and we can still stay connected as human beings and just use these robots and robotics as functions to improve and enhance our lives without stripping away our purpose, because humans need a purpose, right? We need to have goals, we need to have passions, we need to be able to do something. And if we have robots doing everything for us, that can be a little dangerous ethically about, well, gosh, what does that do to our soul?
Yeah, very good point. And I think, like, I'm very optimistic about technology, but I think it'd be naive to not recognize that it also harbors dangers, right? And this is
Yeah.
one of them, I think. And I think we already see it with the advent of this generative AI, where, I would even say right now, AI is not doing what I would like it to do, which is, doing my chores for me, but it's more doing the creative work of writing and creating images and movies and like, oh no, I want people to like keep doing that.
Yeah.
I want the robots and the AI to do the stuff that people don't like doing. Um,
Right.
but yeah, I don't I so, like still I'm very optimistic about the future and about that we're going to be able to turn or to use technology in a helpful way. But I think it's a good point that we do have to keep in mind that it could also be used for or not even just used, right? It could also just turn out to be something that's not a net positive.
Yeah. Well, since humans discovered fire, invented the wheel, we're still here, and there's 8 billion of us. So something we find, we go off the rails sometimes and we find our way back. So hopefully that will continue. Marlin, it's been such a treat to talk with you. And thank you so much for being on the Ignition Sequence podcast, and good luck.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a great honor and a real pleasure to talk to you, John.